Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations in Horror, the podcast. I'm your host, Kevin L. Powers. I'm also the owner and operator of Something Wicked Entertainment and Events, and welcome to our podcast program today. Now, if you've been with our show, you know that we kind of take one individual film and we kind of dissect it. We kind of analyze it, critique it, get to the nitty gritty, and probably, take a couple bones out and look at those things. The reason being is that me and my special guest, because it's always me and my special guest is always different every episode. So you never know what you're going to get when you listen to our podcast. Me and my guest, we kind of take these films and we kind of look at them and we kind of have a general conversation about the movie in order to get to the nitty gritty of what we like about the film, what we don't like about the film, and what we think that you as our audience may or may not like about this film. Or you can just be entertained by the way we talk to one another and make you laugh to the whatever we're talking about. Now, that being said, the movie we're going to be talking about today is actually one that a lot of people out there have seen, and a lot of people probably praise it as an excellent movie. But that does not negate that we still need to have a conversation about it. And that would be Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984. And to discuss this movie with me, I have brought back my esteemed colleague, Mr. Philip Ray. So thank you, Philip Ray, for joining me for the show today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So this may be a little bit different than some of our other shows because we already know that you all are horror fans out there. So if you haven't seen the original Wes Craven Nightmare on Elm Street, you probably should be listening to a different podcast. So we're not going to go through all the nitty gritty and the plot and all that stuff because you've already seen it. What we're kind of going to do is have a little fun with this podcast today. And we're going to kind of get into the stuff that we really like about this movie because, in my opinion, this is one of Wes Craven's quintessential horror films and horror icons that has ever been created. So I gotta get my information from Philip because I grew up with Freddy, but Philip is much younger than me, and I want to know exactly how did you come about watching this film?
For me, I think I saw it on the Sci-Fi Channel at some point. I remember seeing Nightmare on Elm Street on TV at some point, and I was just like, whoa.
Really? So I saw this when it generally came out. I think I saw this when the second one came out because I only remember watching the first two back to back over and over again. I do remember my brother being loving the second one a lot, mostly because Freddy jumps out of a party and starts slicing and dicing and doing all kinds of crazy shit like that. But when the second movie came out, I definitely watched both of these probably on repeat, and then who knows how many times. And then by the time the third movie came out, this was like one of my favorite horror icons before he became a household name horror icon. So Freddy, this one right here was always one of my favorites of the entire franchise. It never lost its luster, no matter how many sequels came about. And it's because of the genius in the way it was put together and made, and how original Freddy Krueger was.
Yeah, Freddy definitely is. When you look at a lot of the horror icons, Freddy sticks out a lot amongst them because of two things: personality and weapon. The thing is, you think of Jason, you think of Leatherface, you think of Chucky. Again, for the weapon, all of them have the most standard type of weapon you can find. Probably Leatherface being the most unique with a chainsaw is probably the most less common object. But but Freddy being the glove knives is such a fun concept, and I'm glad they went with that because originally, because Wes Craven wanted his icon to have his killer to have a unique weapon, and he went around with a lot of different ideas before they settled on the glove idea. Freddy was going to have a sickle, which would have been interesting, but definitely they went with the right idea with the gloves. And then personality wise, we wouldn't have a Chucky without a Freddy. I fully believe they made Chucky's personality off of Freddy because at the time, all of our killers were very serious. You had Jason, you had Leatherface, Um, all your killers at the time were very kind of either silent or Michael Myers. They're either silent or if any of them talked, it was going to be very not a whole lot of like they weren't going to say a whole lot. They were very serious. While Freddy, they definitely cranked up his funniness moving forward from this first movie. But even there, even here, there's still a little like small little like kind of jabs and riffs that he does. He's a little more talkative than your normal serial killer at the time, and he was and a little not as goofy as it gets, but slightly goofy. And I think that's what made him immediately grips general audience's interest.
Well, I think that one of the great things about this first movie is the because Freddy is an unknown and he inhabits the most vulnerable aspect of all of us, which is in our dreams. It was very terrifying to a lot of people, even more so to the teenage crowd that Freddy goes after for this film. He doesn't go after grown-ups; he goes after teenagers. Even though the parents are who really killed him and maimed him and did all that, he doesn't go after them. He goes after the teenagers, the children. Um,
Oh, and the rules too with that too is the fact that he has his own little rules makes him a little more different than those serial killers at the time because all of them were just, they're slashers. They just see things, they kill, versus Freddy, which is he only can attack people in their dreams, which again, that was a smart idea to definitely make him different.
Oh no, and he looks different. He wears a hat. He has a glove with knives as his weapon. He has a striped a striped sweater. Like Wes Craven wasn't just creating just the ideal of a character. He created it all from the look, the persona. I mean, he hired Robert Englund, who was not known for these type of roles at the time, to be his chief villain in this film. And at least in the first film, he's masquerading as other characters. He's also when you're seeing Freddy as Freddy, he's also a lot of times in the dark. But he has vulnerabilities, which makes the main character of Nancy kind of like one of our early innovative and smart female lead characters. She's not dumb. She just doesn't run throughout the whole movie. She has a plan. That's what makes this movie so much better than some of the other movies out there. Like she starts to figure things out on her own. She goes through the movie, and after she pulls his hat out of the dream, she starts to put the pieces together. She comes up with a plan to defeat him. It's like, and that's something you didn't see in a lot of the female characters in these slasher films at the time. They're more or less, I'm gonna run, I'm gonna run, I'm gonna run. I'm gonna either die or I'm gonna keep running again.
Oh yeah, no, the reason this movie is so successful and is so iconic is literally because of all of Wes Craven's ideas with that. Like so with Freddy, originally he was going so when he was making the idea with Freddy, he again at the time Michael Myers, Leatherface, and Jason were around, so he wanted it to be different. He didn't want his villain to wear a mask. He wanted so that's why he ended up going with being the burn with the Freddy being burned and scarred, which is a great idea. And even Robert Englund was not the original choice for Freddy. He was actually going to be more silent, but he was actually looking at actually the actor who ended up being the body double for Jason at one point auditioned for Freddy, but then when Wes Craven met Robert Englund, he was like completely flipped because he was like originally wanted Freddy to be very tall and big, and then he saw Robert and he's like who was smaller and was like, no, I'm gonna go this direction now, which was such a good idea. And even with Nancy, with all the characters, he wanted it to not be like with Nancy, he didn't want it to be the stereotypical Hollywood screen girl. Like he so he ended up going with Heather Langenkamp, who
Yep.
was that was her breakout role at the time. Like that, she had been in a couple movies before then, but nothing really big. But like he chose her because she did not really read as stereotypical hot femme fatale, and that was a great, again, that's a great choice with that. Like all the casting was good. Again, it was funny for me watch this movie because watching it later, seeing Johnny Depp in this movie, I was like, oh, Johnny Depp's in this movie, not knowing that this was Johnny Depp's first movie.
Well, Johnny Depp is a far cry from the character that he would become famous for in his early career, which is off of 21 Jump Street. This is like, and this is the great thing about going back and watching these 80s movies. You watch all these amazing 80s movies and you see all these the early roles of all these character actors, which are now famous and not doing horror movies all that well. Thankfully, Johnny Depp has done several horror films in his career, including Freddy versus the was it the last Freddy's the Freddy one, the Freddy's night shit
You,
the shitty Friday, the shitty Nightmare on Elm Street movie. Freddy's Dead, the Final Nightmare. Good God, I couldn't remember the fucking name of it because that's the shitty one. Uh, and I say that in loving things. You can rewatch that movie and find something good about it, but it's pretty much the shittiest one out of all of them for odds of reasons. But Johnny Depp comes back for a brief moment in that movie because he liked I'm assuming he liked the experience of working on these films. There's lots of rumors why he came back. But you know, he likes doing horror films every once in a while, and it's good to see, and that's rare. A lot of actors get started in horror films and they never go back once they've made it big. But Johnny Depp kind of okay, he does Secret Window here and there. He comes back, he does a Ninth Gate, and it's good to go back and see him in this movie because it's his earliest role, and he's like he is so genuine as Glenn. And actually all of these actors, Amanda Weiss, Heather Langenkamp, and Johnny Depp, and then the other guy who plays Rod, I can't remember that actor's name, saved my life, are all so genuine as their characters in this film, and they just have great chemistry. And I think that is a testament to how long this film uh, has been around and how much it is still appreciated by audiences today. Like you talk about Freddy, and people are always going to go back to the original Nightmare on Elm Street. Like,
oh yeah, and like talking, and let's be real, one of the also big reasons this movie works so well relates to another episode we've had filmed is again talking about this again, practical versus digital.
mhm.
Back then, like especially in the 80s, you barely like CG was around, but it was used very, very sparingly. So I mean, if for listeners listening to this, if you haven't, watch some of the behind scenes with this movie is honestly, it's crazy how much like the fact that even it was able to exist because there was so much behind the scenes that went on with this. And it's funny because this movie has a lot of milestones. It's the first breakout movie for Johnny Depp. It's the breakout for New Line Cinema because
The house that Freddy built.
the house that Freddie built. Because before this movie, New Line existed, but it mostly distributed. It didn't actually make anything. It didn't produce anything. And this was the first movie they produced, and it became the house that Freddie built after because this movie was its first financial success. Uh, it's very interesting the way again and behind the scenes with this movie, like even New Line did not give them all the money, and so there was like a lot, they had to go outside investors, and that was a whole thing. But eventually they did get the money they needed to produce it, which again, all the stuff they do in this movie is so iconic of not even Freddy, but some of the deaths. I mean, again, everyone remembers the geyser blood scene.
Mhm.
It's again talking about Johnny Depp. He had such a memorable. It's probably why he's willing to come back because he had one of the most memorable deaths. Because everyone remembers the geyser scene, and again, like watch the behind the scenes on this movie because it is just jarring. It's all the cool practical things they did to make this work with the geyser. There's also remember her death, Tina's death. Is it Tina? Yeah, Tina's death.
Yes.
Going on like literally her. So what they did with that was they rotated the house
Hmm.
at the house and just rotated it as she was getting like pulled up on the ceiling, quotation marks. And then again, and then again with the blood geyser, that actually was done upside down too, as well. So again, it's just you just listen to all the behind the scenes with this, and it's such a fascinating movie that it's a miracle it even was able to get made, but it's so thankful that it got made.
This movie has a lot more technical elements to it than you would typically find in like a Halloween or Friday the 13th film.
Yes.
Just a guy walking around in a mask and with a giant killing utensil and killing all teenagers. There's a lot of technical aspects to this film that not all of them were like the first of its kind, but to be used in a horror film like this had never really been utilized enough, and Wes Craven was able to utilize it a lot, especially considering the movies that came before this in his filmography.
Oh yeah, and and because of it, it was definitely more expensive than a lot of the other horror movies at the time. It definitely like this was pro more one of more of the higher budget movies, horror movies at the time. And again, it definitely was. But you can see where all the money went into, and that's definitely like what makes it so memorable
Mhm. Yeah.
and why it's so well loved today.
Well, and it still it holds up extremely well today. It does hold up extremely well. But you also have some amazing supporting cast, mostly from John Saxton. Who, if you know John Saxton, he was around for God knows how much long before this movie. He was in my opinion, a great actor who did a lot of shit before this movie came out, and he was actually playing a lesser role in this film than what he's done before, but he still shines in this film because he's such a great actor. Um, and and the film did allow him to stretch from what he had been known for. So, and that helps. Along with Robert Englund's phenomenal performances, which also holds up. The good thing about Robert Englund, and this goes for all the Friday 13th movies, Friday 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. Forgive me, audience, for getting them mixed up. Nightmare on Elm Street films with Freddy, is that Robert Englund has such a presence in this film that he extrapolates on and carries on to the rest of the films, and he is like the there's he's like the icon of icons for horror because he actually talks. Like,
Yes.
the difference between Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees is that they are visually interesting icons, except for the fact that in most of the Halloween movies, people either hate or love the mask because for some odd reason they just said we had to change the mask in every movie and it looks different in every movie. And some are good masks and some are shitty masks. Uh, Leatherface just grunts, doesn't talk, but he has a big ass chainsaw. But when he changes those female faces, he's a less imposing presence. But Freddy Krueger, out of all of these icons, Freddy Krueger, his burned face, the fact that he was a child molester, the fact that before the movie starts, the parents of Elm Street banded together and they killed this guy. Those background moments that we slowly learn, or Nancy slowly learns as she investigates and asks questions. These are the things that make Freddy Krueger such a huge icon, and with what gives these Freddy movies, especially this one, this cult status and this kind of ambiance is like that just doesn't get touched by a lot of the other horror icons out there, at least in my opinion. I
Well, you hit the nail on the head on one thing with that is again, Freddy, the biggest difference is it has an actor attached to it, Robert Egwin, because again, he made the role. Because the thing with Jason, Michael Myers, uh, we wouldn't see this again really until we get to Chucky again, is because you have an actor who is talking, who is adding his own mannerisms into the character, you can't replace him. It does the actor who play again, that's why literally in the first Halloween, the person who's playing who is the stand-in double is the at one point the director because you could do that because it's just a figure. It is just a person. Anyone could wear a mask. Jason, there's many different people who've played Jason, many people who played Leatherface. It's just you just need a tall, imposing figure. Versus Freddy, which is it has to be Robert Egwin. It has to be him to deliver these lines and stuff. You can't replace him, and that adds up more to the mystique of the character and stuff, and makes him more iconic because there is just one. You can look at all the Friday, you can look at all the Friday 13th movies, and Jason goes through a lot of looks. You can go through all of the Leatherfaces, and they go through different looks. But Freddy stays consistent until they horribly rebooted him. But until then, it was you had one look. Then maybe they changed some things with the sweater a little bit or the hat, but it still was always consistent. And that's one thing. And also, let's be real, he's also very memorable because unlike the other serial killers, they gave him a song that you actually remember. Because I think everyone at some point
That's
has
your
heard
man.
1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. Like,
Jesus, I can't believe you brought that up. But yeah, I mean, this film has a lot of things that just are missing from other horror franchises and horror icons. You
it's
mentioned,
smart.
yeah,
That's
it's a much better written overall film. If Wes Craven wanted to make a dumbed down version of his concept, you would get uh well you would get Freddy's Dead, the Final Nightmare, or and I say that very lovingly, people. uh but the great thing about this is like Wes Craven put so much of his own soul into this film when he crafted it because he was really trying to not only help erase the fact that his biggest successes were movies like Last House on the Left and The Hills Have Eyes, and he was crafting something of which was much more personal to him, which is why he's become the icon that he is. The Freddy Krueger has become an icon.
oh,
West,
there's so much of this movie is Wes Craven's background.
yeah,
Freddy, the name is literally based on a bully in his childhood. The idea of Freddy was based on an old person that scared him when he was young. Like he put so much of his uh childhood into this movie, into
yeah.
the writing of this movie.
Yeah, it'd be like if you read a Stephen King novel, and Stephen King puts so much of his own life in every one of his novels, which unfortunately why so many of his novels feel like they're the same story, just with different characters, because he's essentially recycling some of the same ideals and just putting them in different areas. Wes Craven crafted this film, which you unfortunately don't see in a lot of his later films, when he steps away from writing as much. But this is like before he becomes a huge director. And this was after he was just toiling in the if we all know about Wes Craven, he started off working on porno films before he actually had his break with Last House on the Left, which we haven't discussed in the show yet, but we will one day. And then, of course, The Hills Have Eyes and those rougher movies. This was a much more refined story, a much more refined production. He took a lot of what he learned in those lower end productions and kind of crafted this elaborate horror film when he could have just done another fucking Hills Have Eyes or Last House on Left, but he strived for something bigger, something better. So
Yeah. And I think some of this too, because before this, he just got done doing Swamp Thing,
mhm.
which was a higher budget. Actually, a lot of the stuff at the time was seeing a little bit more of a higher budget. But yeah, I think this time around, he was making something a little bit more new and unique.
Yeah, I have to look and see if he wrote Swamp Thing. I can't remember if he did or didn't. Um,
He did. He wrote Swamp Thing.
okay. And then of course I always lose track of when Deadly Friend came out. Because that was
That
his
was after Elm
okay.
Street. That was actually after part two of Hills Have Eyes, because he did a Hills Have Eyes after Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah, between Hills Have Eyes Part Two, which was he had to do, which is why the less we talk about Hills Have Eyes Two, the better. And Deadly Friend, which he had problems on. It's like this was like the movie. This was like the movie that defined the type of movies he wanted to make. And then of course, he had to go do some other movies to keep food on the table. I guess is the best way of describing that. I'm a huge fan of Hills Have Eyes, but Last House on the Left is kind of a hard movie to get through. And I have yet to actually watch any of his porno films because he kind of helped erase those from his filmography. But we all know that he did a lot of those before he made it big. And it's coming from
Yep.
someone who has a very heavily religious background too.
Don't worry, we'll talk about that in our spin-off Patreon, conversations about porn.
Jesus. Oh, Jesus. I don't think there's enough of those out there for me to actually want to sit through, to be honest with you.
Oh, there's enough porn to warrant that. Uh,
Oh, man. Oh, okay.
but anyway, talking
Yes.
about but yes, I mean Nightmare on Elm Street again. It's pretty obvious why it's such a cult classic. It definitely is smart. Honest, again, it's I think what this movie does so well, and I think a little bit of what the problem that the rest of the series eventually kind of loses a little sight on is the combination of funny and terrifying. The thing with Freddy is he's funny, but he's terrifying. And unfortunately, when we get down the road in the series, they kind of crank up the funny and forget, oh yeah, he's supposed to be intimidating. Uh, I think this movie, because this, as we see later in this franchise, we could see how easily they could have gone goofy, too goofy at the beginning of the series, and I think it would have not had been so profitable as it was uh, then later on down the line.
I don't know exactly how that all works because in all honesty, after this film, the darkest one, in my opinion, is going to be part two, where Freddy's still not funny yet,
Yep.
or part five, which is visually dark because that's the way the filmmaker decided to shoot the movie. The fourth one being the least dark out of the sequels before we get to Freddy's Dead. But Wes Craven would come back to do Wes Craven's New Nightmare and bring a whole new aspect to this franchise, kind of bringing back some of those elements that he had developed in this film, which is what I truly did love. And thank God Wes Craven came back to do New Nightmare. you know, um, but what he created in this film, not only from Freddy Krueger's perspective, but from his final girl, Nancy, and then, of course, from the cinematography in this film, the sequels were always trying to one up what came before. But to be honest with you, it was pretty hard to one up Wes Craven from this film because of, the Glenn's death, Geyser Blood. I mean, geez, you're right. That's an iconic death scene that still holds up after, I don't know, 8 movies now in this franchise.
Yeah. Some of the other deaths down the line have some good like points, have some good like kills and icon and imagery and stuff. But but I think a little bit of issue with some of those is they're kind of comedic. Like I forgot which one it is, but the one with the TV where like Freddy becomes the TV and he pulls a person and pulls
That's
and
the
they
third one,
pulls them
Dream
in.
Warriors.
That's the third one, yeah. So it's like, but those are so kind of played up kind of comedically, while in this, all the deaths, they're really not funny, or if they are, uh they're kind of in a dark humor kind of funny. It's just more like crazy, but they're all serious. That I think they kind of lose a little down the line. Um, so one thing also interesting about the movie is the ending. So Wes Craven originally wanted a happier ending. So in the original draft of it, basically Nancy was going to. It starts out the same. Nancy realizes, oh, okay, I just need to not be afraid of you anymore,
Mhm.
and Freddy disappears. But that's it. So it's left a little more arbitrary. She gets in the car with all her friends being alive and they drive off, and that's how the film ends. It's
Mhm.
not really uh it's kind of assumed, and you don't really know if it is all a dream or not, and all that. And then one of the producers was like, no, I want a twist ending. And so that's why we get the twist ending with Freddy, the car like being Freddy's colors and stuff, and then Freddy grabbing Nancy's mom through the door and stuff, which
Mhm.
also was a very cool effect. Uh, but that was originally that was a producer note, which I'm kind of curious on your opinion. I'm okay with the twist ending, just because it helps. Definitely the imagery of the Freddy car was definitely good. But I don't know. What do you think?
I think that as in the era this was made in, which is the 80s, and people were trying to come up with the next big franchise. That is the reason why they had that they made Wes Craven change it. If it had been up to Wes to make a complete film with his complete vision, you would have something closer to, say, the ending of Flatliner, not Flatliners, but Jacob's Ladder. I'm thinking of Flatliners, but I was really wanting to say Jacob's Ladder. Jacob's Ladder, where it's very ambiguous what happens after the events in the movie, and it kind of ends the movie that way, and there's not going to be any sequels. But of course, this is the 80s, and Wes Craven just created what potentially at the time could have been a great horror icon, and the business people at New Line saw that. Robert Shea, I think, is who was in charge of New Line at the time. Robert Shea. And that was a great thing because even though Wes Craven only came back for the third movie to write a script or story because it got rewritten by Frank Darabont, so I don't know exactly how much was Wes Craven's and how much was Frank Darabont's in the third film, and he didn't really come back until he did New Nightmare. There's a whole like you're trying to create a franchise, you're trying to make money. I'm hoping he made some money off of these damn sequels because it was his original ideal. But you never can tell. But I'm glad the studio made him change it because then we wouldn't have Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which is a brilliant movie in my opinion, which plays on a lot of the themes that he wanted to do in this film, but elaborates on them even more because Freddy Krueger is a different type of entity. And our the themes about our nightmares and stories have to live on, or we just, well, we'll get into New Nightmare one day because that's one of my favorites of all of the franchise there. I was perfectly fine with growing up. Let's rephrase that. Growing up. I was perfectly fine with the direction that the series eventually went when Freddy started being funny and shit because I was aware of who Robert Englund was, and I was perfectly fine with that. I actually really loved part three. I loved part five. Part four had some moments in it for me that I enjoyed. Freddy's Dead, I hated most of that growing up. I could appreciate it now because I've read a lot about from director Rachel Talalay's perspective when she directed the movie and put it together, and she was on the franchise since I think part two or three. I've forgotten which one she started on, but she was working with the whole production, and then she finally got a chance to direct one. And I'm fine with it now. Um, but we're talking about Freddy Krueger as an icon. And I was fine with the changes they made because we as an audience, our tastes change. We become too familiar with certain icons and they have to change because we change. If they don't change, then we end up hating it because it seems like they're just repeating stuff we've already seen before. Now, I don't know if that's your perspective or not, because I didn't know if you grew up with Freddy Krueger like I did.
I did. I have not. I'm not got to see all of the Nightmares. I've seen New Nightmare. I've seen the remake. I saw Freddy versus Jason. I saw the original. Uh, I think I've seen maybe three as well. Uh, but I do know that uh, and even with like him being more haha funny, it wasn't as bad as some other series when how, at least compared to something like comparing to Jason about how many Friday the 13th we've had and how basically convoluted it gets there as well. I think the difference between the two is at least because Freddy is kind of already a wacky kind of funny, especially when in the series when they cranked it up, it allows the wiggle room of the movies to get wacky and funny versus stuff like Friday the 13th, where Jason's not doesn't have that much of a personality. So you have him do wacky things like go into space, and it's like, this doesn't, this feels weird.
That's an interesting. See, that's a very interesting look at it. Because see, I watched every one of these as they were coming out, as they were being released. I think, like I said, I think the first two are the only two I saw after the second one. I think I saw both those two at the exact same time, and I watched the third. I was like one of those kids as they were coming out. I wanted to see them at the theater. Unfortunately, I didn't get to see any of these movies in the theater until Wes Craven's New Nightmare came out. That was the first one I saw at the theater. And then I saw all of them after that, which isn't really much. But I remember being a kid and really like, I gotta see this, I gotta see this at the theater. But my parents thought these movies were too horrifying to send their kid to the movies to go see, which is still fucking odd because, as you know on the show, everybody, my parents allowed me to see a lot of crazy shit at the theater. But Freddy Krueger was that I don't know that horror franchise I did not get to see as a kid growing up at the theater. It was so weird. I had to wait till they came out on VHS. I had to wait till they came out on VHS.
Yep. Now,
Um,
that being said, with everything with with Nightmare on Elm Street, I almost did the same thing you did. Nightmare on Elm Street. Um, Obviously, they tried to do the reboot in 2010. It didn't work out. I think I think between the two, I would argue I think you could do a um Friday the 13th modern. Like I think it's kind of crazy we haven't had them attempt to do another Friday 13th, but Nightmare on Elm Street, I feel like you really cannot do it again. Like you cannot reboot it again. Like a third time this being the case, but I don't think you really can. I think a lot of the stuff with Nightmare on Elm Street really is kind of peak 80s, and I think you can't really do an effective job today because I think today you would just see people want to over CGI everything. It's not really going to it's not going to be as good versus the practical effects of the original. And again, I really think the best of the series is when Wes Craven's attached to it. So unfortunately, Wes Craven isn't with us anymore. I don't think you can do a good Nightmare on Elm Street anymore.
I think, and I'm going to disagree with you on this one. I think you could, but you would need to get someone like a Mike Flanagan to come in and reevaluate the concept. I think it'd be really hard to get along the lines of trying to have a child molester who parents go after and then they kill the child molester. But but how about if you had a kid who you had a kid who systematically, and this is maybe in bad taste for some people listening to the show, if you had a kid who gunned down a bunch of kids at a school, or you can have this grown up, but it would seem more present if you had a kid gun down a bunch of kids at school, and the parents of those kids turned on this kid, and then this kid goes after the parents of those of other kids in that same school district. I think you can get away with something like that only if you can come up with a really good director who could spin it and it not seem in bad taste.
Yeah,
That's the thing about Freddy Krueger. Freddy Krueger, because he was a child molester in the 80s, was fine because the ideal is back then, you had to get everyone wanted to do with child molesters what they need to be done. You burn them, you freaking even now we look down on child molesters. But in this day and age, you don't hear as much about child molesters, and it's kind of something that's no longer as prevalent in the news source. But what you do have in the news source nowadays is you have a lot of shootings at schools, which is very unfortunate, but it's one of those things where because of that aspect, it's almost out of bad taste to try and attempt to do a commentary on that unless you are really careful because you don't
yeah,
want to
because even
alienate.
then, it would be weird to do a funny Freddy with that
But you
concept.
wouldn't do a funny Freddy because you wouldn't be able to get away with a funny one in this day and age. The problem with today's horror films is they are way too serious.
Yeah,
And if you tried to do a funny one, I don't think it would work. You would have to be, like I said, you have to be like a Mike Flanagan, someone who could, or a James Gunn. You'd have to be someone who could spin it in a way to make it interesting and still be funny and humorous and all that type of stuff. James Gunn can do it because he still keeps going back and forth to horror as well as comic books and everything else. And Mike Flanagan would do a completely different spin altogether, but he'd make it work. But you have to have that type of person behind it. And what studio is going to let someone like that have free reign on a character that's iconic as Freddy Krueger? That's going to be the kicker. Mike Flanagan is redoing Carrie, but Carrie doesn't have a legacy like that.
yeah,
They've essentially said, "We want you to do a television show like all the other great television shows you've done. Do what you do." Here it is. They're giving him carte blanche to do with Carrie whatever he wants to do as a television show. I think you could do that. You have to have someone really good at casting, like both of them, both James Gunn and I think Flanagan are amazing at their casting, and they have the ideals to think outside the box because that would be the only way you could find an actor that would be able to play Freddy Krueger, no matter what age you put him at. That's why I think Jackie Earle Haley was a great casting choice for the remake. I think the remake was badly directed. Like they had this great actor, but the makeup looked like shit, and the way the film was way too fucking dark and it didn't seem like a Freddy movie or a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. It just seemed like a standard horror movie of that era, and that's what you don't want. You don't
yeah,
want that. It has to be something like it has to stick out. It has to have something. You're dealing with a dream killer for crying out loud, you know. Um, and you have to have a studio that's not afraid to make a lower end film in order to make a profit. The other problem is they're going to try to make it like an $80 million film, $80 million horror film, and hope that it makes a profit. I'm like, dude, why the fuck are you going to do $80 million? Go get Jason Blum. Someone go get Jason Blum. Give him $15 million. He'll come up with fucking magic.
yeah.
That's
It's
that's the only way I see Freddy Krueger being resurrected, unless you do a prequel before he becomes Freddy Krueger, which I wouldn't be surprised if someone's working on that right now.
yeah. I mean, that's kind of probably the best. Honestly, doing a prequel is probably the closest we could get. I mean, Robert England's still around, so like he could help a little bit, but yeah, it's
He's
just
retired. He says he's retired from Freddy. He's not doing any more Freddy.
yeah. But yeah. Yeah, sorry, that's easy. But yeah, I don't think you can I mean at this point you do a serious Freddy is probably the best you could do with the live action. Even then it's just kind of like I don't know. It's just uh
You could do a serious Freddy if it was a television series. I don't think you could do it if it was a movie though.
Yeah.
If you are doing a television series and you are expanding upon the story, you could do the Wes Craven's The Nightmare on Elm Street as a series, and you can expand on the parents and the history of Freddy that comes back in flashbacks, and actually uh, delve deeper into Nancy's character, figuring this whole thing out. You could do that, and it would be cool. I just wouldn't, but you only do that if it's like 6 to 8 episodes for the season. I wouldn't try to string this along for 13 episodes. It would have to be 6 to 8 episodes on and you could probably get away with it. And then the second season would bring up new characters, but still be Freddy involved, and you could do it like what they did with the Hannibal TV show. They essentially took. I don't know if you saw the Hannibal TV show.
I have not, but I know about it.
They took a concept that probably should have never been expanded into a TV show, but did a really excellent job in expanding it and expanding the concept behind the Manhunter movie. The first book that
Actually, it's interesting because they did also a reboot for Leatherface, I remember.
Mhm. Several.
Several. Uh, but yeah, I mean, Freddy has not gotten one, and actually, I mean, that's probably the best. It's probably the best direction you can do with the franchise at this point is before he becomes burned up. That's probably the end of the movie, but you focus on because technically him being a child molester is not added until later on in the series. For the first 1984, he's just a child killer. It wasn't until later they added the molester part to his title or to
Son of 100 Maniacs and all that other shit that he kept. Yeah.
where they add later all the other kind of ridiculous to his background. But at least the original, he was just a child killer. So you could probably just keep that part like the original, and then you just focus and you can focus on before he donned the fedora. That would be the title of the poster of before he donned the fedora, he was Fred.
Well, you could call it just Fred. You could call it the entire series just Freddy, or you could call it Krueger, or you could call it Fred Krueger. Before he entered your nightmares, and you could do it like Hannibal did it. Hannibal was essentially the fucking serial killer bad guy. You could do Freddy Krueger just like they're trying to do with what Crystal Lake, whatever they're calling it now, with Jason, the prequel series, which I think was a horrible idea to begin with. But hey, you could do it. There's nothing stopping you. But at some point, we don't want to see a fucking prequel to some of these icons. We just want to see another fucking good movie.
Yeah. So
Wes Craven created, crafted, executed one of the, in my opinions, very few flawless horror films of the 80s. Of course, yes, modern day technology can redo this and make it look better, blah, 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 blah. But would it still have the same chemistry and gravitas that this film had? Probably not. This was like lightning in the bottle, in my opinion. Like,
it definitely is. I think especially again, knowing behind the scenes of how hard it was behind the scenes for this movie to even get made. There was a couple weeks where there was a lot of, again, like the finances for this, they had a lot of backers like back out in the middle of filming. So there was 2 or 3 weeks during filming where no one was getting paid, but everyone just kept doing it because they like where the movie was going and stuff. So it's again like there was a lot of things riding on this movie. It's such an example of a passion project.
Yeah. Well, in my opinion, I kind of sometimes look at this as like all the problems Steven Spielberg experienced while making the original Jaws. Like it never seemed like anything worked out for him while filming the fucking movie until it was released, and all the problems actually made the film better.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for the rest of the world, Steven Spielberg keeps saying that he'll never ever go do another movie on open water because of all the pains that he had to experience making Jaws. um, but with this film, and then of course what happened with Wes Craven's script or script ideal, I honestly now get confused on whether or not he actually produced a final script for part three, The Dream Warriors, before Frank Darabont was hired to come in, or if he just came up with a script, like the synopsis and treatment, and then that was what Frank Darabont wrote afterwards. I get confused now; it's been so long, but I
He
know.
worked he worked with there were four script writers in total. He
Yeah,
was in there, but they had like Chuck Russell, Frank
Darabont.
Darabont, and Bruce Wagner also apparently like contribute to the script.
Yeah, I believe Chuck Russell was the director for part three,
Yeah.
so I kind of look at his contributions as being very minimal.
But Bruce Wagner was also heavily involved.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see the multiple different versions of the script. I would really love to see what Wes Craven came up with if he wrote a complete draft of the script. Um, but like most movies, he didn't direct it, so he more or less did his thing and then was replaced by other writers who then did their thing based on what the studio wanted. And then we get part three. Now, that being said, part three is by far, until New Nightmare, the best sequel of all of them. Um, and that's because of the combination of all these people who actually contributed to the final product, and the fact that they bring back Nancy, which is the stroke of genius with the third movie. And that was in New Nightmare. The stroke of genius is bringing back Heather Langenkamp for these fucking movies because she makes these movies so much better than what they probably should be.
Yep. Well, that'll be another episode when we talk.
So, what do you think about the Heather Langenkamp as the final girl slash hero of this film?
Kind of like we covered. Again, she's played uh she is not dumb. She definitely is like she's smart, she thinks things through, and it's what makes her good. It's
Mhm.
because she's not this she like again, she really again, she starts thinking of the things like, okay, I need to keep myself up with caffeine. Like, oh, I need to burn my like I'm being chased. I need to get myself out of this nightmare. I need to burn myself on like the pipe. Like small moments that they're showing that she's actually smart and that she's actually uh it's again a very positive portrayal.
Yeah. So, and I always ask this because she's one of the few final girls who, well, I was about to say that survives, but obviously in the third movie she doesn't really survive that one. Because it was a trend in like for the Friday 13th movies that they just kill the survivors from the previous movie in the new movie to make way for new characters. And essentially this was one of the few franchises that kind of utilize characters or story elements between each movies to make them seem all cohesive as a film. In the second movie, they borrowed Nancy's diary that was left in the house because the second movie takes place in the same house that Nancy lived in. And by the time we get to the third movie, those characters are in the third movie and fourth movie, and then those movies in the fourth movie carry over to the fifth movie. And it was one of those things that made watching this series so enjoyable because the characters kind of segued into each of the sequels until you get to Freddy's Dead. I was about to forget the damn name of that movie again. Damn it. Freddy's Dead. Where they just took it years from the events and just started off with a whole new cast. I also think that's one of the things that helped this franchise endure because they borrowed characters were used in multiple films. Unlike Nightmare and unlike Jason Friday 13th. Jesus. Uh, Sorry everyone who's listening, but us getting these Friday 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street films mixed up in our heads just happens because they're the most iconic of horror franchises. Um, but you don't really, with the exception of three of the fucking Friday 13th movies, characters don't seem to be in multiple ones, and they don't really go in line with a timeline that's credited, really. But this one had something different. this franchise had something different. It was, people followed it because they did a really good job with the characters and they did a really good job with continuing the story from one film to the next. And I think that's one of the great things about rewatching these films. You can watch them separately if you like you did, obviously, Philip, because you haven't seen them all. I actually thought you had seen them all by now.
I still got one or two.
So it'd be interesting, but like me, I grew up watching them in order, and then I rewatched them a ton of times. So, uh, but that's how it is. This is one of the reasons why we have these conversations, is to kind of get an idea of where your position is watching these films and my position, because it's going to be different because we're from different generations. So,
Yep.
do you have any other thoughts on Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street?
Nope. Again, there's a reason why it's very iconic, and again, it's definitely it's so interesting to listen behind the behind the scenes with this film. So definitely, if you haven't, readers definitely watch them. There's a couple of documentaries about the making of this that is very interesting. But yeah, I mean, it's funny about this film because it did it revolutionized a couple things. Again, it made a film company. Like everyone knows New Line Cinema now,
Mm-hmm.
but we wouldn't have a New Line Cinema as it is today if it wasn't for Nightmare on Elm Street. We wouldn't have Johnny Depp like we do now if it wasn't for Nightmare on Elm Street. Even again, like you wouldn't have Chucky if you didn't have Freddy. Like this movie is very if you haven't seen it, definitely see it. It is definitely stands the test of time, and it will continue to stand the test of time as we all grow old and brittled.
As we go old and brittle, Jesus. I will say this: if you haven't not seen Nightmare on Elm Street, the original one, I do not know what rock you've been under for so long, uh, because every Halloween, it doesn't matter. There hasn't been a new fucking Freddy movie in God knows how long. I don't even know when the remake was made, but
2010.
huh?
2010.
2010. So 2010 was the last time there was a Freddy Krueger movie. But it you will always see kids, grown-ups, teenagers every Halloween dressed up as Freddy Krueger. That is like one of the most iconic Halloween costumes out there. It is there every year at Spirit Halloween. You can easily buy it, and despite the fact there hasn't been a new film in 15 years, it is still one of the most popular costumes out there, even for little kids. That's how huge the Freddy Krueger is, and the Nightmare on Elm Street film. So, I implore you, if you really have never seen this movie, you definitely need to see it. And don't tell me you haven't seen it, because I had to come over there and slap you in the face and wonder why you haven't seen it. Unless you're just scared of horror movies, then you're not listening to our podcast. So, uh, with that, what we like to do is we like to rate the movies that we see on our program, from a 1 to 5 stars, 1 being poor, 5 stars being excellent. Where on the spectrum, Mr. Phillip, do you put Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street?
5 out of 5.
5 out of 5. You know what? I was afraid you were not going to do that, because some of the guests on the show says, "Oh, I'll never give a movie 5." But you know what? I give this movie a 5 too, because I have watched this so many times, and even when I rewatched it for the podcast, I still was never bored, and I never found anything but the utmost excellence in this Wes Craven movie. And this is not because I'm a huge Wes Craven fan, because I've loved Wes Craven's movies, but I can admit when he did some shitty movies. The less said about Cursed, the better. He did some, or Hills Have Eyes Part Two. Okay, he didn't always hit it out of the park, but this movie here, even with the stuff that he was forced to change, made this film better. It made this film into what the franchise and what Freddy Krueger is today. It was, unfortunately, without him being here, he didn't have his hands in, extending that past Robert Englund's tenure on the franchise. But there is hope that someone like a Mike Flanagan or James Gunn will come along and kind of revitalize this damn thing. Someone finally taking it over. But we can always hope. It's a dream. It's a dream. But until then, we will always have this movie to watch and rewatch again and tell our friends about this movie. With that, I want to thank you, Philip, for joining me on this conversation in horror where we discussed A Nightmare on Elm Street. For everyone out there, I hope that you check this out. If you've never seen the movie, like I said, I'm going to slap you. Come back to your house. I'm going to slap you upside the head. Other than that, I hope that you will listen to some of the other episodes we've done before. We've done some of Wes Craven's previous films, so make sure you check those out. Make sure to like, follow, share, subscribe so you never miss an episode. Regular episodes are every Wednesday at 8 a.m. and our special themed episodes are usually on Mondays at 8 a.m. So make sure to subscribe so you never miss those episodes. And then make sure to check out our Patreon exclusive podcast, Conversations in 4Color, which delves deep into comic books, manga, and graphic novels. You have to be a subscriber or follower in order to access that podcast. So go ahead, just become a supporter so you can support our arts and our continuing success as podcasters here at Something Wicked Entertainment. From all of us here at Something Wicked Entertainment, we want to wish you a pleasant day, and we hope to hear from you at the next podcast. Everyone have a great day. Conversations in Horror is a Broken Lighthouse Pictures production, written, produced, and directed by Kevin L. Powers, executive producer Kelly A. Inoka. All contents and material from this episode of Conversations in Horror is copyright 2025 Broken Lighthouse Pictures.